Background in science. It was just before lockdown that these people who were against masks, Muslims, immigrants, and gays, would stand outside Dublin's GPO on Saturdays and spout their stuff. Their numbers varied, but 60 of them was normal enough. Not enough to be taken serious. No real threat. Nobody in government yet. 75 years back, the world said no to fascism, but not seeing the right wing were making a comeback. America's evil clown president had empowered them. On a global front, the world seemed at a precipice. It could fall towards the corporate scramble model, where the corporations create shortages by grabbing everything for a few, and the many fight amongst themselves for whatever crumbs fall. Or people could go for something like DiEM25 and dismantle the institutions which rewarded the greedy and punished the needy, and try to make a more equitable world. A couple of people with anti-racist placards would stand on the Rhode Island opposite the anti-maskers at the GPO in Dublin. The anti-maskers would shout "Keto scum" off our streets at the anti-racist crew. Sometimes they would cross over the road and physically attack the anti-racist crew. It made for a very unpleasant day. Willis resented that he had become embroiled in such an unpleasant activity. It seemed so pointless too. The anti-mask, sectarian, anti-immigrant crowd weren't going to change their minds because a few people stood opposite them. So why the hell did he do it? He just found it hard to walk past and not say anything in response. Anti-mask conspiracy theories mixed with sectarian racist rhetoric is dangerous. They would mildly couch their sectarian and racist views. They weren't anti-Muslim, but against the barbaric halal slaughter. They weren't anti-immigrant, but they were sick of seeing Irish people homeless while immigrants got housed. They believed there was a paedophile cabal in the Irish government. Anyone who opposed the anti-maskers were also paedophiles. They would dock people on social media, give out their names and addresses, and say they were paedophiles. They seemed a very confused, contradictory crew, loosely bound together by their angry frustration at the uncertainty of COVID-19 and its effects on their lives. As a teenage Catholic male living in a Protestant area during the sectarian insanity of Belfast's 70s, Manus had often been harassed. People, other teenagers with tartan scarves, young males keen to prove their manliness through violence, would dunt into his shoulder as they walked past him, spit on him, call him names. He was in the minority. They were the majority. There was already a sectarian cultural history and an existing sectarian state, so the few politicians that gained power and position through the stirring speeches which brought sectarian murders to their height can't be totally blamed, but their part shouldn't be overlooked either. Once, as a teenager, Manus had walked on the streets with four friends. Two loyalist blokes walked past him on the opposite direction. Probably the first time Manus had ever been in the majority. Manus had dundered one on the shoulder. It's a funny thing, a dunder. It's not quite a physical attack. You just throw your shoulder into their shoulder as though they were not there. As though you were not going to acknowledge their right to take up the space they walked in. "Did that make you feel big?" said one of his friends. It made Manus think at the time. He didn't want to become like his enemies. He didn't want to deny them the right to take up space. He wasn't out for revenge. He wanted to walk the streets without fear of physical or verbal attack. And Manus had to wonder now about standing opposing racist rhetoric. The racists allowed no debate. They wanted no understanding. There was nothing more than two opposing teams shouting abuse at each other. Perhaps the correct response would be a counter-demonstration which examined and pointed out the falseness of the right-wing views. But for whatever reason, the left in Dublin couldn't muster a weekly counter-protest with more than half a dozen people. Such bad odds, what was the point? What was achieved? To act as though you believe your actions have some effect is foolish. To act as though you believe your actions had no effect, cowardly. He had read that, or something close to it somewhere. So now it was Saturday morning. He sat at the back door drinking a cup of tea, not having a fag, while his porridge simmered and then settled. Apart from the anti-maskers and the couple of people who would stand to oppose them, there was also going to be an Assange protest today. Protest. Aha. 2, 3 or 4 people would stand outside the GPO from 12 to 1 with signs saying "Free Assange." Malice would be one of them. But again, he had to ask himself, what was the point? It might be nice for the protesters to see each other, reaffirm their beliefs, but the effect it would have on the American or English or even the Irish government would be nil. And most people on the street didn't know about Assange, and if they did, they didn't care. What did it matter to them? How would it affect their real world of going to work and paying the bills and the latest app or Blockbuster, or just getting paid and getting laid in the self-absorbed, blinkered lifestyles we have been funneled into? Assange had tried to inform the people on the street as to what corporate-run governments were up to in their world. Democracies overthrown, and corporate governments installed, and wars just so that corporations could gain control of the world's resources. But the people were too busy consuming corporate media and goods to take much notice. He had his porridge, toilet, and then tried for some self-awareness, sitting for an hour trying some techniques that might help him through the day. At 11 o'clock, he went in to his own street to help with the monthly community clean-up. He hoed the weeds. At the end of the war, he was outside Fergus's house, and the two discussed the pros and cons of weeding. The bees had been using the weeds in the dandelions. I know people say they're just weeds, but they are pretty, Fergus said. Malice agreed. He didn't mind weeds then. Anyway, hoeing them down did nothing but encourage them. It wasn't like he could get at their roots, and scraping them away just made deeper ruts for them to grow. Still, it got him out with his neighbours on the street, and he jokingly added, as they would have said when I was a kid, it made the place a bit more Protestant looking. Kind of half stalled when he said this as he realised Fergus was actually a Protestant and had probably faced sectarian shit through his own life. Not on the same level as the North, but still. Malice figured the man had experienced sectarianism and was a little put out at how his mocking Ulster colloquialism might be interpreted. But all that stuff was ancient history, and Fergus just laughed. Malice didn't stay to have coffee with his neighbours, but received praise for his weeding before he left. It was nice to have neighbours, though the others on the street owned their homes and he just rented. It made a difference. Malice would be 20 or 25 minutes late to join with Dave and Betty and possibly Colin, who were going to try to make people aware that Assange was facing life in prison for exposing the horrendous crimes of corporate governments. It wouldn't do much good, but it wouldn't do any harm. They were unlikely to take much abuse too. That was always a positive factor these days. They had been standing from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, but the anti-maskers and the counter demo had put them off. So now Dave had said they would meet at 12. Malice had fallen out with Dave the week before. David said he was anti-mask. He wouldn't be standing with the anti-maskers because of their racist overtones, but he didn't agree with masks. Something about the herd immunity and how we would never get it because we were stopping the spread. And how the different approach of governments made no real difference. The virus had a life of its own. Dave had a background in science, he said. The fact that such views had caused the death of hundreds of thousands of people angered Malice. He respected Dave for protesting about Assange, but his anti-mask stance made him look to Malice like a conceited childish fool. Still, he worked with the tools to hand, and Malice would try to keep their differences separate from their common protest. Julian Assange getting imprisoned for exposing corporate government crimes stood out as important. How would we ever know about the horrendous crimes committed for oil and power if you allowed those reporting the crimes to be imprisoned? But today there was no one at the GPO at 12. Dave and Betty must have cancelled because of the anti-immigrant, anti-maskers and the counter-protest. There was lots of cops on O'Connell Street though. Malice just walked on past. He bought a samosa from Govinda's. A pretty little woman served him. He'd often wondered on her. She'd been serving him samosas for over a decade, but they'd never had any real communication. Thoughts were as far as his contact ever went. He was old. He had to take it on board. He had two front teeth missing. All that boy, girl, or man, woman stuff was over for the likes of him. He was rational enough to accept the fact. Deep down, underneath the rationale, he still dreamed of a connection, physical, mental, and emotional, between him and another. The Windows seemed like a reasonable place to sit, but he decided against and just went out with the samosa in his hand and ate it on the street. His daughter phoned him. She had changed her name to Sawyer and her gender to non-binary. His little Tranachist comrade. Sawyer said the left were going to stay away from any counter demonstration because of COVID and because the violence at last week's counter protest had put them off. The Dublin left were such wusses. Manus walked around on his own, spotted Aisling and Veronica having coffee, and he stopped beside them. It's the fucking hardcore, he said, and it was true. They were the hardcore of resistance, stood against the racist sectarian speeches that were being made on O'Connell Street every Saturday. More comrades. Another woman called Gina and her fella joined them. On the age front, he figured Gina and her bloke had to be around his age. Veronica and Aisling were younger. Caroline, the youngest at 29 years of age, also turned up. They went round to the GPO. They stood where the anti-maskers usually stood. Today, the anti-maskers were at the RTE buildings. They were going to march from RTE to the GPO. The counter-protest group knew there would be a large crowd of anti-maskers, some of them very keen on violence. The counter-demonstrators were sick and tired of being massively outnumbered, threatened and abused. They decided not to stand against them today. They left chalk messages where the anti-maskers would stand. No place for Islamophobia. No place for transphobia. Anti-maskers are conceited fools. No place for racism. No place for hate. Not much of a counter-protest. But what can a half a dozen do? Gina and her fellow went off for a pint. Caroline, Aisling, Veronica and Manus went off for coffee. Nobody really felt good. No one felt up to facing them while they were so massively outnumbered. But no one felt good about letting them spew out their sectarian shit unopposed. The anti-maskers had their march on live streaming. Caroline and Veronica kept looking to see where the march had got to and what they were up to. The sound of the marchers' live stream coming out of Veronica's phone gave Manus the heebie-jeebies. He explained that he couldn't even listen to mainstream media, and a right-wing media made him physically ill. Manus explained that he had regularly walked past groups of young men like the anti-maskers when he was a kid. He instantly felt stupid by the reference. Too long ago, too difficult to convey. Big loyalist rallies with people like Paisley and Craig calling for defence of their Protestant loyalist heritage against the papist hordes. They used words like cleansing and liquidation, and afterwards the thugs in the corners would be emboldened. After coffee, Caroline decided to go on home. Manus, Veronica and Aisling couldn't help themselves. They went back into the GPO. Gina and her man had come back too. They all laughed at their earlier statements that they weren't going to stand here today. It was like a car accident you're horrified by but still have to look. So they stood there, 5 against 100 or more. Veronica had her battered cardboard sign, no to racism, no to homophobia, no to Islamophobia, no to hate. Aisling had one too, no to racism. The anti-maskers had signs. Our Catholic faith is under attack. RTE is the virus. Fake COVID virus. No to halal slaughter. Some of them crossed the road to the island where the 5 counter-protesters stood. One woman and her son, who reminded Manus of Trump's kid, crossed over with a banner saying that the rosary is the answer to Ireland's problems. Manus called to the young 16-year-old boy. Go on, the Virgin Mary will give you a good blowjob when you die. Manus wasn't proud of his words. It was just the kid seemed so smug. The saintly little face changed as he turned to threaten Manus, though. Aisling kept putting her little cardboard sign in front of the Holy Rosary large banner. The police tried to move her on, but she was insistent. One of the anti-maskers snatched her sign off her. They started chanting, "Pedo scum off our streets." Some more of the anti-maskers came across to the island. One man came for Malice. Looked like he was in his 50s. Malice tried to understand the man on a personal level. Why was he going for Malice? What did he believe? And why was Malice a threat to that belief? The man was staring at Malice. "You and me," he was saying. "Come on." Why was the man there? Had the man not proved himself a man when such concepts were proved by physical violence? And Malice, why was he there? Had he run too often as a kid and now figured he was in safe territory, in a place where he could and should make a stand? Malice could see no reason to engage with the man on this level of "come on, you and me." The guards were all around them. The man could see that as well as Malice. So what was the aggressive display for? They could exchange a few blows, but surely little more. The man lurched forward and made a swing, and his fist connected with Malice's neck. Malice didn't hit him back. Malice was not a pacifist, but his experiences with law enforcement officers had led him to believe that should he hit the man back, then he, not his attacker, would be arrested. The anti-masker's friends pulled him back as the guards came between them. "That man has just punched me and I want him arrested for assault," Malice said. The guards did not. The man's friends pulled him back. Malice repeated his statement and one guard engaged with him. "Move over there," said the guard. "No," said Malice. "Maybe racism is acceptable to you, but it's not to me." The guard turned his back. Another bloke on the island made a beeline for Malice. Malice touched the guard on the arm and said, "Excuse me, but that man is going to punch me. When he does, I'm going to hit him back. Don't arrest me afterwards." The guards came between them. One big fat guard, identifying Malice as a cause of disturbance, thundered Malice out of the road. The counter-protesters left before the protest had ended. They hugged as they parted. "Good to see you, comrades," Malice said. He felt tired and weary when he got home.